Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Forget the glowing screens, the soft hum of your heater, and that warm blanket wrapped around your legs. For the next little while, I'm taking you somewhere colder. Much colder. But don't worry. This is a bedtime story, not a survival test. You're safe, warm, and hopefully already halfway to yawning. Now, close your eyes for a moment. Well, not if you're actually watching this on a screen, but you get the idea, and imagine stepping out of modern life and into a world made of stone. Thick stone, heavy stone, the kind of stone that does not care about your personal comfort. We're going back hundreds of years, slipping quietly into the Middle Ages, into the echoing halls of a medieval castle where the night wasn't just dark. It was an event, no city lights glowing in the distance. No cozy fireplace app on your TV. No electric heater gently warming your toes. Just the natural chill of the world, and inside those stone walls, it could feel like the entire winter was trying to sneak into your bedroom. Let's start with the first feeling you'd notice. The cold. Not the, oh, it's kind of chilly in here cold. Not the, let me grab a sweater real quick cold. I'm talking about the kind of cold that makes you question all your life decisions. The kind that nibbles on your fingertips and sneaks down your neck like a mischievous little ghost. The kind that makes you curl up so tightly under your blankets you begin to resemble a confused armadillo. At a medieval castle at night was a place where warmth did not stay put. It escaped. It fled. It sprinted out the windows, ran into the hallways, climbed the stairs, and left you behind wondering, seriously? And yet, people lived here, slept here, survived here. Some even liked it here. So the big question we're exploring in this whole video is simple. How did people manage to sleep in these freezing stone fortresses without turning into medieval popsicles? Before we dive into all the fun details in later chapters, things like fur blankets, canopy beds, hot stones, and the questionable smell of medieval fireplaces, we need to set the mood. So come with me, quietly. The castle is settling in for the night, and we don't want to disturb anyone. Trust me, in a place like this, every sound echoes like it's trying to get attention. Let's walk through a castle hallway together. Picture this. The stone floor is cold under your feet. Even if you're wearing thick wool socks, you can feel the chill rising through the soles like the castle is trying to greet you with a frosty handshake. The torches along the corridor flicker softly, throwing warm orange light on the walls, but not warm enough to actually warm you. They look cozy, but they are lying to you. As you walk, your breath makes a little cloud in front of you. Yes, inside. Because castles did not believe in insulation. If your bedroom feels a little drafty sometimes, imagine a castle bedroom. The drafts in a castle weren't breezes. They were more like tiny, invisible troublemakers blasting cold air through every door frame, window slit, and crack in the stone. And if you think I'm exaggerating, some castles were so chilly that people literally slept with hats on. Not stylish hats. Not cute hats. Just honest, practical, please don't let my ears fall off hats. But there's a strange kind of beauty in this world too. The castle at night isn't just cold. It's peaceful. Deeply peaceful. The kind of quiet you can feel in your bones. The kind where every sound, the crack of a torch, the soft flap of a tapestry, the whisper of the wind, becomes part of a gentle lullaby. Now we're stepping into one of the castle's upper corridors. These were usually where the bedrooms were, because being higher up kept you away from the cold, damp air that gathered near the ground floor. The doors are heavy wood, iron-banded, and slightly crooked because, yes, even the Middle Ages had construction issues. You push open one door, slowly, because in every medieval story a door creaks, and this one doesn't want to disappoint. And you step into a bedroom. The first thing you notice isn't the bed. It's how dark it is. Candles flicker here and there, but the shadows rule the room. The walls are bare stone, cooled down by the night air. A single small window, more like a slit, really, lets in a streak of pale moonlight. If you're lucky, someone hung a thick tapestry over part of the wall to keep the wind out. If you're unlucky, that tapestry is still waiting for someone to repair it. You hear the fire in the corner crackle. It's trying. But a medieval fireplace wasn't exactly known for being efficient. Smoke was always a problem. Drafts pulled the warmth the wrong way. And even when the fire was blazing, the heat never filled the whole room. It clung to the hearth like a shy child, refusing to spread. Still, someone is sleeping here tonight. Maybe a lord. Maybe a lady. Maybe a guest who's hoping a warm bed was part of the invitation. And whoever is staying here knows that survival depends on preparation. But before we get into how people slept and how they avoided freezing, we should appreciate how different nighttime felt back then. Today, if you feel cold, you tap a button, turn a dial, grab a heated blanket. In a castle, you planned ahead. You stacked wood. You layered blankets. You trained your body to deal with cold like a medieval warrior of bedtime. Nighttime wasn't just the hours for sleep. It was a quiet test of patience, warmth, and creativity. And somehow, in all of this, people still found ways to rest, dream, and wake up ready to do it all over again. As we settle into this peaceful medieval night, let this chapter wrap around you like a warm blanket, one that probably smells much better than the ones used in the actual Middle Ages. Let the thought of flickering candlelight and distant winter winds gently pull you toward that slow, sleepy headspace. We're just getting started. This castle is full of secrets, full of clever tricks people use to survive the cold. And by the time we reach the end of this journey, you'll understand exactly how they managed to stay warm, or at least warm enough. But for now, breathe slowly. Let the chill of history fade into the background as the story begins to unfold. The night is long. The castle is quiet. And you're here, safe and warm, ready to drift deeper into the past. All right, welcome back inside the castle. If you thought Chapter 1 was chilly, oh buddy, we're about to talk about why medieval castles were basically giant stone refrigerators pretending to be homes. And trust me, the more you learn about castle design, the more you'll wonder how medieval people didn't just migrate en masse to somewhere warmer. Like, I don't know, literally anywhere else. Let's start simple. If you've ever touched a stone wall in winter, you already know half the story. Stone is cold. Stone stays cold. Stone doesn't care about your feelings. You could throw the coziest blanket in the world over a stone wall, and the wall would just stare back at you like, nice try. Now imagine an entire home built out of that attitude. Castles weren't made for comfort. They were made for survival and defense. Medieval architects weren't thinking about cozy nights, or good airflow, or warm feet at 3 a.m. They were thinking about things like, how do we stop invaders from climbing in? How do we store grain? How do we stop the whole place from catching fire? Comfort was somewhere around item number 127 on the priority list. Let's talk structure. Castles were built with massive stone walls, some thicker than a person is tall. Those walls were amazing at stopping arrows, fire, battering rams, and the occasional angry neighbor. But they were terrible at keeping in heat. You could light a bonfire inside the room, and the stone would simply soak up that warmth like, ah yes, thank you. I will now hold this heat hostage for the next 6 hours while you shiver. These walls basically acted like giant cold batteries. During winter, they absorbed the chill all day, and at night, they slowly released it back into the rooms like some kind of passive-aggressive air conditioner. Imagine trying to sleep while the wall next to you is sighing cold air onto your face. Medieval folks didn't imagine it. They lived it. And then there were the ceilings. Castles loved high ceilings. The higher, the better. Great halls were designed to make you feel small and impressed, not warm and cozy. All those huge open spaces meant that any warm air from fires drifted up, and away, straight to the ceiling where nobody could reach it. If heat were a balloon, it would have been floating at the top of the hall, laughing quietly while the people below rubbed their hands together like frustrated penguins. Next, let's talk about windows, or rather, the little slits pretending to be windows. Medieval castles weren't out here giving you floor-to-ceiling views or morning sunlight streaming in like a lifestyle commercial. Nope. Windows were tiny, narrow openings called arrow loops or arrow slits. They were designed so defenders could fire arrows out while being protected from incoming attacks. Warmth? Airflow? Sunlight? Never heard of her. These narrow windows were the perfect shape for wind to whistle through at 2 a.m., just to remind you that the outside world was frozen and wanted you to be frozen too. Some later castles added shutters or tiny panes of glass, but even then, they still leaked cold air like a medieval air conditioning system set permanently to Arctic. Now let's talk doors. Big wooden doors look cool, right? Very dramatic. Very you shall not pass. But they didn't seal tightly. They weren't fitted with rubber insulation or weather stripping. They were just heavy planks of wood stuck into a frame that didn't really care about being exact. The gaps around these doors were basically little highways for cold drafts. Imagine trying to sleep while invisible icy fingers poke at your ankles under the blanket. Congratulations, you officially understand medieval nighttime. But wait, there's more. Castles weren't only cold, they were damp. Moisture crept in through the stone, especially in thick-walled rooms. And cold dampness hits different. It's the kind of chill that settles into your bones like it's signing a rental contract. Fires helped, but only a little. And if your fire wasn't blazing constantly, the damp came right back like, "Hey, miss me?" And then there's the way castles were laid out. Rooms were designed with defense first. That means lots of twists, turns, uneven floors, staircases that spiral in annoying directions, and narrow halls that are absolutely perfect for ambushes but terrible for airflow. Warm air couldn't circulate well. It got trapped in weird places, while other areas felt like you were sleeping in a wind tunnel. Imagine trying to walk from a warm room into a hallway that feels like walking straight into a snowstorm. That was normal. And here's something fun. Medieval chimneys weren't great either. Early castles didn't even have proper chimneys. Fires were lit in the middle of the room, and the smoke escaped, well, hopefully out the roof. Sometimes, if it felt like cooperating. Later, chimneys improved things, but they still leaked heat like a medieval toddler losing grip on a cup of soup. A lot of that precious warmth just floated right out the top. And if the wind blew the wrong way, congratulations, your room was now filled with smoke, and your warm air was gone. Oh, and we can't forget the floors. Most upper floors were made of wood, which sounds nice until you remember wood loves to creak, warp, and leave gaps for cold air to sneak in. Ground floors were usually stone, which stayed cold no matter how many layers of rushes, straw mats, or tapestries you threw on top. And then, there's the size of the place. Castles weren't small, cozy cottages. They were enormous. Big rooms, long corridors, huge halls. Heating a castle would be like trying to heat an entire shopping mall with one little fireplace. No matter how hard you tried, most of the place stayed cold. To sum it up, castles were cold because they were giant stone fortresses with bad insulation, high ceilings, tiny windows, drafty doors, damp walls, leaky chimneys, and huge rooms built for war, not naps. And yet, people called these places home, and somehow, some way, they managed to sleep here. Not just sleep, but rest, dream, and wake up ready for another day of medieval life. Which, let's be honest, already had enough challenges without the added joy of turning into an ice cube at night. But don't worry, they had tricks. Smart tricks. Clever little solutions that helped them turn these cold stone beasts into something livable. We're going to uncover all of those secrets soon. But for now, wrap your warm thoughts around this simple truth. Castles were never meant to be comfy. They were meant to protect. Warmth was something you created yourself, like a tiny victory against the cold every single night. Next chapter, we're stepping outside and talking about something even bigger, the climate of the Middle Ages. Because the world back then wasn't just cold inside. It was cold everywhere. If you thought the castle itself was cold, wait till we talk about the entire climate of the medieval world. Because honestly, it wasn't just the walls, the windows, or those drafty doorways causing trouble. Nature itself seemed to be running on extra chilly mode. Let's step outside the castle for a moment. Don't worry, you can keep your imaginary blanket on and breathe in the medieval night air. It hits you immediately. Sharp, dry, cold enough to make your nose crinkle. And if you're thinking, wow, this feels colder than normal, you're absolutely right. Because the Middle Ages weren't just cold. They lived through something we now call the Little Ice Age. Now, to be clear, scientists still debate the exact dates, but the general idea is simple. From roughly the late 1200s to the 1800s, the world got noticeably colder. Not, build a snowman in July cold, but definitely, why are my toes frozen inside my boots? Cold. And the best part? Medieval folks had no idea why it was happening. They couldn't Google it. They couldn't watch a documentary. They couldn't blame it on climate change or shifting ocean currents. Their explanation was usually something like, well, the weather has decided to be mean this year. Again. But let's go step by step. The climate before the chill before the Little Ice Age really kicked in, some parts of Europe actually experienced a warmer period. Historians call it the medieval warm period. It didn't mean beach vacations or medieval sunscreen, but temperatures were mild enough for longer harvest seasons, steady crops, and slightly more comfortable winters. Then, the warmth ended. The it didn't fall off a cliff, more like a slow slide into nope. Too cold. Stop right now. Enter. The Little Ice Age. When the cooler weather settled in, winters became longer, colder, rougher. Rivers froze more often, sometimes solid enough to hold festivals on top of the ice. Crops failed more frequently, and people all across Europe had to adjust their daily routines, including how they slept. Imagine living in a world where winter isn't just a season, it's a personality. A stubborn one. Like someone who overstays their welcome but never brings snacks. It just keeps showing up earlier, staying later, and making everything harder. Now combine that with a giant stone castle. Yeah, medieval life wasn't exactly a cozy living situation. Regional differences. Cold, colder, and are you kidding me? Let's take a small tour around Europe to feel the vibe. Northern Europe. If you think Britain is cold now, picture it without modern heating. Rainy, windy, gray, and damp. Throw in a castle or two, and boom, you're basically living inside a refrigerator made of stone. Scotland? Even colder. Scandinavian regions? Oh, they laughed at cold. They had furs, fires, saunas, and a cultural attitude that said, snow? That's just a suggestion. Still, winter nights there could make even the bravest Vikings say, all right, that's enough. Central Europe. Germany, Poland, Austria, these places saw heavy winters too. Snowy forests, icy mountain passes, and huge temperature drops at night. Castles there often sat on high hills or mountains, where the winds loved to swing by for a nightly visit. Those drafty castle windows? Yeah, the wind absolutely loved those. A sensory walk through a castle bedroom now. Let's slow down and really feel the atmosphere of a medieval chamber. You open the wooden door. It groans, because every door in history loves dramatic entrances. The room is dim. Shadows gather in the corners like quiet little creatures. A single candle flickers on a wooden table, its flame doing that wobbly dance that always looks like it's trying to tell you a secret. The air is cool, maybe a little damp. The scent of smoke from the fireplace hangs in the room, comforting in its own rustic way. You brush your hand along a tapestry, feeling the thick wool threads under your fingertips. They're rough but warm, like a loyal dog that growls at strangers but loves you anyway. If you listen, you might hear the low howl of the wind slipping past the window shutters, the faint crackle of burning wood, maybe distant footsteps in the corridor. Sometimes, if the castle is really quiet, you'd hear the walls themselves settling, stones shifting, beams creaking. A soft reminder that this place has been standing for centuries. It's eerie, but also peaceful, lonely, but somehow soothing. A medieval bedroom wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a little bubble of warmth carved out of the cold world. Every blanket, every curtain, every ember of the fire was there for one purpose: to help you make it to morning comfortably enough to do it all again. The big picture so far, we've seen the hierarchy of warmth, the solar. We're trying our best. Guest rooms, you're welcome, but please be grateful. Servant rooms, good luck. Wear socks. But no room in the castle was truly warm. Even the best chambers couldn't escape the cold nature of stone walls and winter winds. Which is exactly why medieval people developed clever ways to stay warm. Tricks we'll explore in the next chapters, because the room itself couldn't save you. You had to save yourself, and with that, we're ready to move on to the next piece of this cozy mystery: the hearth. Welcome back to our quiet stroll through medieval castle life. In this chapter, we're still exploring the big mystery of the night. How on earth did anyone sleep in those drafty stone walls without turning into an icicle? We've talked about fires, warm rooms, sleeping arrangements, but now it's time to talk about something truly important: clothes. Layers. So many layers. Medieval folks didn't just dress. They armored themselves against cold like they were preparing for battle. But instead of swords and shields, their weapons were wool, linen, fur, and yes, sometimes even weird-smelling sheepskin. So for tonight's cozy history chapter, let's tuck in and explore the medieval wardrobe, specifically, the part designed to keep people from freezing their toes off, the medieval secret. Where everything you own now, castles were cold during the day, but at night, imagine the temperature dropping even further, the wind whistling through tiny window slits, dust floating around, and you trying to fall asleep thinking, yep, this is fine. To make it fine, people piled on clothes. And I don't mean a gentle 2 layers. No, they wore layers on layers, like a medieval onion. Base layer, linen shirt or shift, soft, breathable, and surprisingly warm. Middle layer, thick wool tunic, scratchy, yes, but wonderfully insulating. Outer layer, maybe a cloak, mantle, or even a coat-like garment. Bonus layer, fur, if you were lucky, or rich, or both. Sleeping naked? Absolutely not. That was a luxury for people who lived in tropical places, or modern humans with heating. Most medieval folks slept fully clothed and sometimes wore extra clothes just for bed. Staying warm was a priority, elegance was not. If you looked like a bundle of laundry lying on a bed, that just meant you're doing it right. Wool. The real MVP. If medieval Europe had a national hero, it might have been wool. Wool was thick, warm, water-resistant, durable, easy to make and everywhere. It was basically the medieval version of fleece, except it sometimes smelled like farm animals and could scratch you until you questioned your life decisions. But guess what? People didn't care. Warmth was king. A wool tunic was like wearing a personal fireplace. A wool cloak? Even better, wrap yourself in that thing and boom, you're instantly 20% warmer and 10% more stylish. Medieval stylish, not Instagram stylish. Fur. The fancy stuff now. If you were wealthy, like really wealthy, you slept wrapped in fur. Anyone who's watched medieval dramas has seen fur-lined cloaks sweeping dramatically behind kings and queens. Well, those cloaks also doubled as excellent blankets. Popular furs included fox, beaver, rabbit, marnerman. This one was royal-level fancy. Fur was like the medieval equivalent of high-end heated bedding. Luxury, but efficient. Of course, if you were not wealthy, your fur options were, let's just say, budget-friendly. Sometimes that meant sheepskin with the wool still attached. Cozy, but maybe not quite as glamorous. Still, warm is warm, and nobody cared what you looked like at 2 a.m. when the wind was shrieking outside your window slit like an angry ghost. Cloaks. The medieval blanket you wear. Cloaks weren't just for dramatic entrances in candlelit hallways. They were basically portable blankets, and people wore them to bed all the time. Imagine, you climb into bed, you pull one blanket over you, then another. Then, you pull your cloak over your shoulders like a hooded sleeping bag. Some cloaks even had fur linings or hoods, giving that extra, I refuse to freeze tonight, energy. And since cloaks were huge, heavy, and warm, people could wrap themselves up like burritos. Warm, slightly itchy burritos, but still very effective. Nightcaps. The unsung heroes. Yes, the medieval nightcap. Not the drink, though that helped too. But the hat. If you ever wondered why people in old drawings are always sleeping with those floppy cloth hats, here's why. You lose a lot of heat through your head, and medieval bedrooms were cold enough to make your ears feel like frostbitten popsicles. The nightcap wasn't fashion. It was survival. A soft linen or wool cap kept heat in, reduced drafts, and made sleeping much more bearable. Some were basic and simple. Others were long, floppy, and looked like they belonged on a cartoon elf. But they worked. And when you're freezing in a stone room, effective beats stylish every time. Boots in bed? Here's something fun. In especially cold weather, some people slept with socks or soft boots on. Think of them like early medieval UGGs, because cold feet equals misery, and misery equals no sleep. Soft leather slippers, wool stockings, or fabric wraps were used to keep feet warm. No one was sleeping barefoot on icy stone floors unless they enjoyed suffering, which, probably not. Even bedding was clothing now. Here's where things get interesting. Sometimes, instead of just using blankets, medieval folks used garments as bedding. Cloaks, tunics, mantles, anything thick enough to keep heat in became part of the nighttime insulation strategy. If you had a best cloak, you might use it mostly at night. A cloak that doubled as a bedspread. Very normal back then. It's like wearing your warmest winter coat inside because the heater's broken, but all the time. Layering equals life. Let's imagine someone settling down inside a medieval castle on a cold winter night. They might be wearing linen shirt, wool undertunic, heavier wool outer, tunic, wool stockings, leather or felt shoes, fur-lined cloak, nightcap, and over the bed, they'd pile wool blankets, fur spreads, extra cloaks, basically anything that felt warm. By the time they were fully tucked in, they probably looked like a cocoon made of fabric and determination. But guess what? It worked. When the fire died down, the wind howled, and the stone walls grew colder than a grumpy dragon's heart. Those layers kept people alive, warm, and able to sleep. A cozy ending to this chapter. So, Chapter 5 reminds us that medieval people didn't have central heating or electric blankets, but they had some seriously clever tricks. Warm clothes were essential, not just during the day but all through the night. Layers were survival, fur was precious, wool was everywhere, and fashion? Well, staying alive was the only trend that mattered. So wrap yourself in your comfiest blanket, take a breath, and drift through the medieval night knowing that wool, cloaks, and cozy layers once stood between people and the freezing dark. Welcome back to our quiet little walk through medieval castle life. In the last chapter, we talked about how people bundled themselves up like wool-covered burritos. But tonight, we're moving on to something even more important, where they slept. Because let's be honest, no amount of cloaks, nightcaps, or woolen socks can save you if your bed is basically a rock with extra steps to so in this chapter. Let's gently wander into the world of medieval beds, mattresses, and all the creative ways people tried to make sleeping in a giant stone refrigerator just a tiny bit more comfortable. Settle in, breathe slow, and imagine flickering candlelight dancing across wooden bed frames as we explore the medieval bedroom. The bed frame. More than just wooden furniture, castle beds weren't just simple little frames. Oh no, if you were noble, or even slightly important, your bed was almost a status symbol, sometimes even more impressive than your dining table or your sword collection that a medieval bed could be. Big carved heavily, dramatically draped like it was hiding some royal secret. These frames were often made of oak or other sturdy wood, which meant two things. They lasted practically forever. They weighed roughly the same as a small horse, but the height, that wasn't just for show. Beds were often lifted high off the ground to get away from cold drafts, rats, bugs, and anything else that skittered across castle floors at night. So if you climbed into a medieval bed, you weren't just getting in. You were ascending, like you were mounting a sleeping throne. The medieval mattress, a bag of whatever you had now. Let's talk mattresses. Forget memory foam, pillow tops, cooling gel layers, or anything with the word orthopedic. A medieval mattress was basically a big fabric sack stuffed with whatever soft stuff people could gather. Common fillings included straw feathers, wool rushes, like long grass, or, if you were wealthy, down feathers that felt like sleeping on a cloud made of money. But these fillings had personalities. Straw mattresses were cheap and common, but they got lumpy fast, and they were a little crunchy. The medieval bedtime soundtrack wasn't just wind and crackling fireplaces. It was your mattress rustling like a pile of autumn leaves. Feather mattresses, on the other hand, belonged to nobles and wealthy families. These were soft, warm, and luxurious, but they had to be constantly fluffed or the feathers clumped together and shifted in weird ways. And yes, sometimes feathers poked through. Medieval comfort wasn't perfect. Wool-stuffed mattresses were warm and long-lasting, but heavy. Very heavy. Moving one was a two-person job, unless you were built like a blacksmith with nothing to lose. But here's the deal. No matter what they used, the medieval mattress was still a huge upgrade from sleeping directly on stone floors. Mattress maintenance. The not-so-fun part here is something they don't show in movies. Medieval mattresses had to be taken apart and refilled regularly. Straw went flat. Hay attracted pests, rushes rotted. Feathers escaped and formed tiny pillow rebellions. So at least once or twice a year. More if you didn't want visitors crawling through your bedding. Everything had to be emptied out and refilled. It was messy. It was smelly. It was definitely not a peaceful spa day for the bed, but people did it because good bedding meant warmth, and warmth meant survival. Sheets, covers, and blanket mountains, even with a mattress below them. Medieval folks loved a heavy bedding setup on top of them. Thin blankets simply weren't part of their vocabulary that a typical bed might include. Linen sheets, soft and surprisingly comfy. Thick wool blankets, fur covers, extra cloaks thrown on top, and sometimes enough layers to make the sleeper feel like a loaf of bread rising under kneaded dough. And because linens were expensive, people didn't change sheets every few days. Instead, linen sheets were prized and washed occasionally, while wool blankets and furs were simply aired out or beaten clean. Think of it like medieval dry cleaning, without the dry or the cleaning. The canopy bed, the medieval MVP. Now, we get to something iconic. Canopy beds. These weren't just pretty decorations or a chance to feel dramatic whenever you entered your room. They actually served several very practical purposes. 1. They kept out drafts. Curtains around the bed trapped warm air like a cozy bubble. Point 2. They offered privacy, especially in rooms with multiple people sleeping around. Point 3. They kept bugs from dropping on you. Yep, medieval castles had high ceilings, and things lived up there. Point 4. They looked extremely cool. And if you were noble, looking cool mattered. So when someone pulled the bed curtains closed at night, they weren't being fancy. They were building a tiny heated tent inside a freezing castle. Shared beds. The warmth advantage. We talked about fire, clothing, bedding, but here's one more medieval trick. People shared beds a lot. Friends, servants, siblings, even travelers. If you were in the same sleeping space, odds were good you'd be sharing body heat. Now, it wasn't always cozy. Imagine sleeping next to someone who snored like a war horn or kept stealing the blanket layers like a medieval bandit. But the warmth was worth it. And remember, central heating didn't exist. Your best insulation might have been the person next to you. Beds for servants and guards. Very different story. While nobles rested in tall, cushy beds, the people working for them did not. Servants often slept on simple straw pallets, benches, wooden platforms, or sometimes near the kitchen where the warm oven made it feel less like winter. Guards on night shifts might nap on whatever surface was nearby, sometimes wrapped in cloaks, sometimes sitting up, sometimes not sleeping much at all. Comfort was for the wealthy. Warmth was for the clever. Sleep was for anyone lucky enough to get it. Imagine it for a moment. Picture climbing into a medieval bed at night. You step into your room lit by one flickering candle. The stone walls carry a quiet cold that clings to everything. You change into extra layers of wool. You pull back your bed curtains, your own little warm hideaway. You settle onto a straw or feather mattress that creaks or sighs beneath you. You pile blankets up to your chin. You pull your nightcap down over your ears. You snuggle in like you're entering hibernation. The wind hums outside. The fire crackles softly, and against all odds, it's warm enough to sleep. A gentle ending. So, Chapter 6 shows us that medieval beds weren't just furniture. They were survival systems. Every part of them, from the mattress stuffing to the curtains, played a role in helping people stay warm through long, icy nights. It wasn't luxury. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. And with that, we drift quietly into the next chapter of medieval nighttime life, a little warmer, a little cozier, and maybe a little more grateful for our modern blankets. Welcome back to the quiet glow of medieval castle life. We've talked about fires, clothes, beds, layers, blankets, pretty much everything that kept a person warm at night. But now we're stepping into one of the most surprisingly effective heating systems of the medieval world. Other people. Yep. Medieval folks did not do lonely, spacious, sleeping in the middle of a king-sized bed. Energy, that's modern life. Medieval life had one rule. If you want warmth, share it. So curl up, relax, and let's drift into the world of shared sleeping. One of the coziest, most practical, and sometimes funniest parts of medieval nights. Why sleep alone when you can sleep together? Imagine living in a castle with stone walls colder than dragon breath. Fireplaces fade out overnight. Drafts sneak through cracks. Temperatures drop like a stone in a pond. So what did people do? They slept in groups. Lots of groups. All kinds of groups. The basic logic was simple. More bodies equals more heat. It's the same principle that keeps campers warm in tents or penguins warm in the Arctic. Except instead of penguins, you have medieval villagers, servants, guards, traveling merchants, nobles, and sometimes total strangers. Not exactly glamorous, but definitely warm. Family beds. The medieval most families, especially peasants and lower-class workers, slept together in what we'd call family beds. Picture it. Parents skidsmabe, a baby, maybe a grandparent, and possibly a dog or cat tucked in there too. It wasn't weird. It wasn't awkward. It was life. Bed space wasn't meant for privacy. It was meant for warmth and survival. The more bodies under the blankets, the warmer the atmosphere. And hey, when it's freezing outside, nobody complains about shared feet or the occasional midnight elbow. Servants and nobles. Unexpected bedmates. Here's a cozy little twist. Even nobles, who had fancy bedrooms, sometimes weren't sleeping alone. It was very common for ladies in waiting, personal attendants, or trusted servants to sleep in the same room, sometimes even in the same bed. Not because the nobles were lonely or afraid of the dark, but because warmth, safety, company, and yes, still warmth. 2 or 3 people under thick covers created a warm bubble that helped everyone sleep better. A medieval noblewoman might be tucked into a lavish canopy bed, with a companion snoring gently beside her like a human space heater. Travelers and inns. The original shared room. If you think sharing rooms on a budget vacation is rough, medieval inns would have tested your soul. Travelers. Arriving at inns couldn't demand private rooms or single beds. Rooms were shared with strangers. Beds were shared with strangers. Blankets were shared with strangers that you'd walk in and the innkeeper might say something like, "Room 3, third bed on the left. You'll be beside a merchant and across from a baker. Enjoy." And that was totally normal. People curled up next to whoever happened to be passing through town that night. It saved money, saved space, and most importantly, saved them from freezing. Sure, you might wake up with someone else's feet near your face, but at least you weren't shivering in the dark. Soldiers. The warmth of companionship and duty. Now, let's step into the lives of soldiers and guards. Whether in a castle garrison or on the battlefield, soldiers often slept in tight groups. Sometimes this meant sharing a tent, sleeping shoulder to shoulder in barracks, falling asleep wrapped in cloaks near a dying fire, or sharing blankets laid across straw pallets. Soldiers didn't care about comfort. They just wanted warmth. And when a freezing wind rolls through your camp at 2 a.m., the best thing you can offer your fellow man isn't a sword. It's your body heat. The night watch shuffle guards on night duty had an even stranger sleeping pattern. They usually took turns, half slept, half stayed awake. Then they swapped. The one sleeping often curled together near the warmest spot they could find, sometimes near a fire, sometimes on a shared pallet, sometimes in a guardroom piled with cloaks. You'd walk into a guardroom late at night and find what looked like a pile of cloaked potatoes sleeping in the corner. Not elegant, but effective. Monks. Even spiritual people needed warmth in monasteries. Monks slept in long dormitories lined with simple beds or wooden platforms. Did they sleep alone? Technically, yes, separate beds, but alone might not be the right word. Dozens of monks slept side by side, all in the same room, all breathing the same air, all wrapped in wool robes that were never quite thick enough. The shared room kept the cold manageable, silent, peaceful. A kind of warm, spiritual sleepover. Heat by pets. The original fluffy helpers. Pets weren't just adorable companions in medieval times. They were practical warmth machines. Dogs especially slept on or near people to share heat. Cats did too, though usually only if it benefited them, because cats have always been like that. A cute little dog under the blankets. Perfect foot warmer. A cat curled on your chest. Bonus heating pad. Animals played a small but helpful role in nighttime survival. But what about privacy? Great question. Here's the answer. They didn't really have any. Medieval people didn't treat privacy the way we do. It wasn't expected, and it wasn't considered essential. Sleeping in groups was just normal life. Nobody judged you for snoring. Nobody cared if someone talked in their sleep. Nobody freaked out over shared blanket space. When temperatures dropped, keeping warm mattered more than personal space. Imagine it for a moment. Close your eyes and picture a medieval castle at night. In one room, a noblewoman and her attendants whisper softly before drifting off under heavy furs. In another room, for children sleep tangled up like puppies. Servants rest near the fire. In the great hall, sharing blankets and soft snores. Guards nap in pairs during their shift breaks. Boots still on, cloaks wrapped tight. Dogs curl beside their owners, offering small pockets of warmth. Many people, many breaths. One shared goal. Stay warm. It wasn't always comfortable. It wasn't always quiet. But it kept them alive. A gentle ending. So, Chapter 7 shows us just how communal medieval sleeping could be. Warmth was a team effort. Beds were shared, blankets were shared, rooms were shared, and even pets played their part. Sleeping together wasn't strange. It was survival. And in those long, cold castle nights, there was comfort in knowing you weren't alone in the dark. Take a slow breath. Pull your blanket up. Welcome back to our peaceful little journey through medieval nights. So far, we've talked about clothes, beds, shared sleeping, and all the clever tricks people used to stay warm in those icy stone castles. But now it's time to explore something central, literally and emotionally, to medieval life. The hearth, the fire, the warm, glowing heart of the castle. In this chapter, We're going to wander gently into the world of medieval fireplaces, how they worked, how people used them, and why even the smallest flame meant comfort, protection, and sometimes survival. So take a breath. Imagine the soft crackle of burning logs. And let's drift into the warmth of Chapter 8. Fire. The medieval lifeline. Before we go any further, let's get one thing clear. Without fire, medieval nights would have been brutal. No ovens, no heaters, no electric anything. Just darkness and cold. A single hearth, even a small one, made a huge difference. It was the center of life, for warmth, cooking, safety, light, and community. In a world where winter could be harsh enough to freeze water inside your house, fire wasn't a luxury. It was life-saving. The Great Hall, where the fire ruled in most castles, the largest and most important fire burned in the Great Hall. This wasn't just a living room. It was the beating heart of the entire fortress. Imagine stepping inside. A long hall stretches out before you. Wooden tables and benches line the center. Banners hang from the rafters. And at the front, or sometimes right in the middle, is a massive fireplace. A real giant, stone, wide, deep, big enough to roast an entire animal if needed. This fireplace was everything during winter. Servants, guards, workers, everyone gathered around it to eat, talk, warm their hands, or simply survive. And if you were lucky enough to sleep near the Great Hall's hearth, congratulations, you had prime real estate. But not all fireplaces were created equal. Fireplaces in medieval castles varied a lot depending on the time period, the region, and the wealth of the owner. Early castles often just had a central fire pit, smoke drifting up to a hole in the roof and everyone coughing like they were stuck in. A smoky barbecue. Ventilation wasn't great. Your clothes, hair, and blankets would smell like you'd spent the day roasting chestnuts, even if you hadn't. Later, castles upgraded to proper stone fireplaces with chimneys, which pulled smoke upward, reduced coughing, used fuel more efficiently, kept rooms much warmer. But even then, fireplaces were far from perfect. A lot of heat escaped through the chimney, and stone walls still absorbed cold like they were trying to win a competition. Still, a fireplace made a room feel alive. Fuel. What they burned to stay warm. Now, you might be wondering, what did medieval people actually burn in those huge fireplaces? Good question. The most common fuels were oak logs, beech wood, pine, though it crackled like crazy, peat in some regions, charcoal, and sometimes even dried animal dung. If wood was scarce, peat burned slow and steady. Charcoal burned hot and clean. Wood burned bright and cheery, but wood wasn't cheap, and burning too much meant running out fast. So fires were managed carefully, almost like precious resources. At night, fireplaces weren't usually blazing hot. Logs were pushed together to make a slow, lingering burn that lasted until morning. Not perfect, but better than total darkness. Bed warmers. Portable heat for cold nights. Here's where medieval creativity shines. People used bed warmers, small metal pans filled with hot coals, placed under the blankets before sleeping. Basically, early heated beds. Imagine a servant sliding one of these warm pans around your mattress to chase away the cold. Kind of like tucking in a warm loaf of bread, but you had to be careful. Bed warmers could scorch sheets, burn mattresses, or accidentally set things on fire. Things nobody wanted happening while they slept. Still, the heat they provided, pure bliss. The glow that made people feel safe. Fire wasn't just for warmth. It was for comfort. A flickering hearth made a room feel alive, less lonely, less frightening. In an age where nighttime was truly dark, no streetlights, no lamps outside, nothing but moon and stars, the soft glow of fire soothed fears and quieted worries. Children slept easier near a fire. Adults relaxed a little by its light. Even late-night guards appreciated a moment's warmth before returning to their rounds. Fire gave people hope in the coldest hours. Nighttime rituals around the hearth. Evenings in medieval castles had a simple rhythm built around the fire. People might take turns warming their hands, roast a little food before bed, mend clothes in the firelight. Stories, prayer, simply sit quietly listening to wood crackle. Fire brought people together the same way campfires do today. It was a place of shared warmth and shared peace. Before sleeping, servants would bank the fire, pushing ash over the glowing embers so they kept burning softly through the night without roaring into flames. In the morning, the embers were stirred back to life to start a new day's fire, to cycle as reliable as sunrise. private chambers, tiny hearths, big relief while the great hall had the biggest fire. Nobles with private rooms often had their own smaller fireplaces. These weren't huge, they were more like compact heat stations. But even a small hearth could raise a room's temperature enough to take the edge off the night. Picture a noble climbing into bed. A small fire glows across the room. Shadows dance on the stone walls. Heavy curtains close around the bed, trapping warm air, and the room feels safe. Even if the world outside is cold and dark, that it wasn't modern heating, but it was warm enough to sleep. Imagine it for a moment. Close your eyes and drift into a medieval castle at night that a fire crackles softly in the grate. Hall. Servants sit close, wrapped in cloaks, sharing quiet whispers. Down long corridors, small fireplaces glow behind wooden doors. Sparks float upward into tall chimneys. Warm light flickers across stone floors. People gather, breathe, relax, and slowly slip toward sleep. The fire isn't just heat, it's comfort, it's company, that it's the guard of the night, that a gentle ending. So, Chapter 8 reminds us that medieval people didn't fight the cold alone. Fire lit their nights, warmed their toes, cooked their meals, and held communities together. The simple flame meant safety in a world full of long winters and dark, drafty stone rooms. Stay warm, breathe deep, and when you're ready. If you've ever shared a bed with another human, you already know two basic truths of life. Point 1. It's warmer. Point 2. It's complicated. And medieval people knew both of these facts very well. In fact, shared sleeping was one of their most reliable technologies for staying warm on cold castle nights. Forget central heating. Just grab a family member, a servant, or the nearest squire and pile everyone together like human firewood. Cozy, yes. Peaceful? Not always. But necessary? Absolutely. Tonight, in this chapter, we're sliding quietly into the world of medieval shared sleeping arrangements. Why they happened, how they worked, and what it was actually like drifting off with 3 other people breathing in your direction. So fluff your imaginary straw pillow, pull your wool blanket up to your chin, and settle in as we snuggle. Medieval style. Bed sharing was normal. Very normal today. Many people choose between a king-size mattress, a queen, or maybe a twin if life is being a little rude. But in the medieval world, bed size wasn't a personal preference. It was a survival strategy. Beds were expensive. Rooms were cold. Fuel for fires was limited. And insulation? Let's just say no one was installing triple-glazed windows and stone towers. So, what did people do? They shared. A lot. Families slept together. Servants slept together. Soldiers slept together. Guests might even end up in your bed if you had one of the nicer mattresses in the household. It wasn't seen as odd or awkward. It was simply the way life worked. Imagine you're a medieval castle resident. You crawl into bed, and someone else is already in there, snoring quietly. Do you complain? No. That person is basically your heated blanket with a pulse. Cozy community goals. The big medieval sleep sandwich. A typical shared bed might have 2, 3, or even 4 people squeezed together. Think of it like a human sandwich with a blanket wrapped around the whole group. Everyone's body heat radiated into a single warm bubble, something like a natural electric blanket. Except it smelled more like wool, damp boots, and leftover stew. People arranged themselves in a few common ways. Side by side, the classic approach back to back, also known as the don't breathe on me method, facing inward, recommended for maximum warmth and minimum draft, layered with kids in the middle, also known as the kid burrito technique. Kids often slept in the warmest spot, right in the center, sandwiched between grown-ups. It reduced their risk of freezing and also kept them from crawling out of bed at night and wandering off like tiny medieval zombies. A bed for 2 or 3, or whoever needed it. In castles, beds were a bit like public resources. If you worked in the household, say, as a lady's maid, or a squire, or a visiting craftsman, you might end up sharing a bed with someone of your own rank. Not for romance, not for drama, just to not freeze. And remember, privacy was not really a thing in the Middle Ages. Even nobles, who had private chambers, were rarely actually alone. Servants slept nearby. Guards rested by the doors. Pages snoozed on benches or rolled blankets. So, sharing a bed wasn't even the most crowded part of castle life. It was just one layer in a whole stack of "we're all stuck together." Picture that. You settle into bed, blow out your candle, and just as you're drifting off, Someone climbs in beside you because their sleeping spot was too cold. Would it annoy you? Yes. Would you kick them out? Absolutely not. Body heat was valuable. You'd just sigh, adjust your blanket, and accept your new nighttime roommate. The noble version, slightly fancy, still shared now. Nobles might enjoy larger, better beds, sturdy wooden frames, thick mattresses stuffed with feathers or wool, and canopies that trapped a bit of warmth. But even nobles didn't always sleep alone. A lady might sleep with her maid beside her. A lord might share his bed with a trusted servant on dangerous nights. Sometimes, high-ranking guests were offered space in the same bed because it was considered a gesture of hospitality, not awkwardness. Yes, you heard that right. Welcome to my castle. Please share my bed. It wasn't weird. It was an honor. Imagine being offered a place beside the local lord, feather mattress, warm blankets, maybe even a heated stone at the foot of the bed. Luxury, medieval edition. The downsides. Because of course there were downsides now, let's be honest. Bed sharing sounds cozy in theory, but the medieval folks absolutely had to deal with the classic problems we still face today. The snorer, there was always one. And without earplugs, you just had to deal with it. The blanket thief, somebody always hogged the only warm blanket, leaving everyone else shivering and plotting revenge. The night kicker, you drift off peacefully, and then whack. Someone's knee reminds you that comfort is temporary. The chronic fidgeter, a person who rolls over every 30 seconds like they're rotating on a spit, but even with elbows to the ribs and stolen blankets, sharing a bed was still better than freezing alone. And medieval people accepted these little nighttime battles as part of life. Sleep as a social thing. Bed sharing wasn't just about warmth. It also built closeness. Families talked before falling asleep. Servants trusted each other more. Children felt safer. Stories were shared. Jokes were whispered. Plans were made. Even in cold stone rooms, the bed became a pocket of warmth, both physical and emotional. Imagine drifting off to the sound of your family's quiet breathing, a fire crackling in the corner, the chill kept at bay by the people beside you. There's something simple and grounding about that. Group sleeping in the great hall. Let's take a step beyond the noble chambers. Many people in a medieval castle, workers, guards, servants, didn't have private rooms at all. They slept in groups right in the great hall, dozens of people, side by side, on straw mattresses that made a loud crunch every time someone moved. Sure, it wasn't glamorous, but it was warm, and there's strength in numbers, especially when there's no heating except a fire that's slowly dying down to embers. All those bodies in one room created a cozy, shared warmth that the stone walls couldn't steal. In the end, survival was a team effort. That's the real heart of medieval sleeping life. Staying warm wasn't something you did alone. It was something you did together. Whether you were a knight, a maid, a child, or a cook, your best nighttime defense against cold wasn't a fireplace or a fancy blanket. It was another human being curled up beside you. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't always peaceful, but it worked. And in a world where the wind could howl through cracks in the stone, and frost could form inside your bedroom, and winter storms could shake your chamber door, warmth was life. And sometimes, life meant scooting a little closer, sharing a blanket, and whispering, "Hey, stop kicking me." Before we drift deeper into our medieval night, let's talk about something very personal, something every one of us deals with, something that says a lot about who we are. Pajamas. Or, in the case of medieval people, whatever they could get their hands on that wasn't freezing, scratchy, or crawling with something questionable. Tonight, we're stepping quietly into the world of medieval sleepwear. What did people wear to bed long before fleece pajamas, heated blankets, or cute socks with little cats on them? The answer might surprise you, or confuse you, or make you say, "Wow, thank goodness for modern laundry." So tuck yourself in, pull imaginary wool socks over your toes, and let's explore the soft, the scratchy, and the oh no, not that, of medieval bedtime clothes. Most people slept in their clothes. Yes, really, let's start with the basic truth. Most medieval folks didn't have a special outfit just for sleeping. Nightwear wasn't really a thing unless you were rich, important, or very fancy. And even then, it was mostly about warmth, not fashion. So what did regular people do? They just slept in the clothes they wore all day. Simple as that. It sounds uncomfortable. But remember, medieval clothing wasn't like our stiff jeans or tight shirts. Most garments were loose, long, and made from wool or linen. They were basically giant medieval hoodies. If you were already wearing something warm, why take it off in a freezing castle room? Imagine you're sitting by the fire in your tunic and thick wool socks. The fire dies down. The air gets colder. Are you really going to peel everything off and hop into bed wearing nothing but bravery? Nope. You just roll right into bed fully dressed, muttering, "I'll deal with laundry in the spring." The medieval chemise, the all-purpose undertunic now. Not everyone slept in day clothes. Many people had a simple undergarment made of linen, a chemise for women or a shirt for men. These were long, soft, and surprisingly comfortable. Linen breathes well, dries fast, and feels gentle on the skin. For some, it was the closest thing to proper pajamas. Think of it as the medieval version of a big t-shirt you wear to bed because all your real pajamas are in the wash. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't stylish. But it worked. People might remove their outer layers at night, but keep the chemise on because it held in body heat, it kept the bed covers cleaner, it felt better than wool rubbing against your skin. Honestly, pretty reasonable. Nightcaps. Not just for storybooks. If you picture an old-timey nightcap from a Christmas story, long, floppy, maybe with a tiny puff at the end, you're not far off. Medieval people absolutely wore caps to bed, especially in cold weather. Why? Your head releases a lot of heat. And if your bedroom feels like a cave in January, keeping that heat is important. Yes, bedtime fashion included. Wool caps, linen caps, fur-lined caps, for the extra fancy. Hoods tied under the chin, yes. Some people slept with hoods like tiny, snoring ninjas. Warm ninjas. Nightcaps were so common that even wealthy people used them. In fact, if a medieval artist painted a sleeping person, the nightcap was practically part of the uniform. Socks, boots, and whatever kept toes alive. Here's something that might surprise you. Medieval people took cold toes very seriously. Very seriously. Some wore thick wool socks to bed. Others used strips of cloth to wrap their feet, like cozy little mummy toes. And if things got really cold, boots. Yes, some folks slept in their boots. Especially travelers staying in drafty halls or guards sleeping between shifts. It wasn't stylish, but it helped prevent frostbite. Picture that. You crawl into bed and stretch out your legs. Clunk. Your boots bump the footboard. Not elegant, but very warm. Furs. The medieval weighted blanket. If you were lucky enough to have fur clothing, like a cloak or a pelt, you absolutely used it at night. Furs kept out the cold better than almost anything else available. People used them as outer layers, but also wrapped around their shoulders, laid across their legs, worn like giant fluffy scarves pulled up over the head like a personal tent. Fur was the medieval version of maximum comfort mode. The kind of thing you'd grab before settling in for a long winter. Of course, fur also came with the risk of smelling. Let's call it historic. But warmth beats perfume when your breath is turning to frost. The noble version of nightwear. If you lived in a castle and had money, your sleepwear could get a little more luxurious. Nobles sometimes had fine linen nightshirts, soft wool robes, decorative sleep caps, silk undergarments. Rare, but very fancy. Slippers for walking around their chilly chambers. But even the noble life wasn't as glamorous as it sounds. Their bedrooms were still cold. Their beds still needed layers of blankets. Their nightclothes were still about warmth first, looks second. You can imagine a noble lord stepping into his chamber, sighing at the cold, pulling on his long nightshirt, and saying something like, "Ah yes, the garment of true kingship, the gown of warmth." Not nearly as majestic as armor, but much more practical. At 2 a.m. travelers had the hardest time. If you were traveling, say, a merchant, soldier, messenger, or pilgrim, you didn't have a fancy wardrobe with you. You slept in your cloak, your boots, your tunic, your hood, whatever layers you had left. A traveler's blanket was often just their outer coat. A traveler's pajamas? Whatever, they didn't mind wrinkling. Imagine falling asleep in a noisy hall, wrapped tight in your cloak, hugging your bag because you don't trust the guy snoring next to you. Not glamorous, but warm. Children's nightwear. Cute, but practical. Kids usually slept in simple linen shirts or in their regular clothes, depending on the cold. Parents bundled them as much as possible because children were more vulnerable to freezing. Sometimes kids even wore little wool caps and mittens to bed. Yes, medieval babies and toddlers probably looked like tiny sleeping explorers preparing for a very gentle polar expedition. And honestly, adorable. So, what did medieval people wear to bed? The short answer: whatever kept them warm and alive. The longer answer: Linen chemises, long shirts, layers of everyday clothes, wool caps, wrapping cloth socks, or boots, fur cloaks, hoods tied tight under the chin. Nothing fancy. Nothing trendy. Just simple, practical clothing built for survival in cold stone towers. When you picture a medieval castle at night, imagine not elegant silk robes, but people curled under blankets, wrapped in layers, hats pulled low, doing their best to stay warm as the wind rattles the shutters, and maybe whispering to the person next to them, "Don't steal my blanket." Because some things never change. Imagine standing inside a giant stone castle at night. No heaters, no radiators, no warm air drifting through vents like a gentle hug from modern technology. Just cold stone walls, drafty windows, and wind that sneaks in like it paid rent. So how did people arrange their rooms to stay warm? How did they set up their living spaces so they didn't wake up as medieval popsicles? Tonight, we tiptoe through the chambers, halls, and secret corners of a medieval castle to see how room design helped people survive the long, cold nights. Think of it like medieval interior decorating. Except instead of matching curtains, they were trying not to freeze. Take a deep breath, settle into your blanket, and let's wander through a warm and cozy version of the Middle Ages. Sleeping high up, the warmest place in the castle. Here's a fun fact: warm air rises. And even if medieval people didn't explain it with fancy science, they absolutely knew it was true. That's why many sleeping chambers were located up higher in the castle, sometimes on the second floor, sometimes in tower rooms. The ground floor was colder, draftier, and often had doors opening to the courtyard or the outside world. Not great for sleep. Not great for toes. Upstairs, things were better. Less cold air blowing under doors, fewer drafts from outside, warmer from kitchen fires or hearths below, more protected from weather. Imagine a castle like a giant fridge. The bottom is the coldest shelf. The top is still cold, but at least it's not the frozen vegetable drawer. Sleeping high wasn't luxury. It was survival. The thick, heavy curtains that weren't for decoration. When we think of medieval curtains, we picture huge fancy cloths hanging dramatically. But those curtains weren't there to impress visitors. They were there to block cold air. Sleeping chambers often had curtains around the bed, curtains across doorways, curtains covering drafty windows, curtains dividing large rooms into smaller warm pockets. Think of these curtains as medieval force fields. Simple cloth barriers that kept warm air from escaping and kept cold drafts from attacking sleeping noses. The canopy bed wasn't just a nice piece of furniture. It was a temperature-controlled sleeping pod, the closest thing a medieval person had to a personal heated bedroom. You could crawl underneath, close the curtains, and trap the warm air from your own body and the blankets around you. Basically a wearable fort you slept inside. Small rooms equals warm rooms in modern houses. We often love big bedrooms with lots of space. But in a medieval castle, the smaller the room, the better. Tiny chambers were easier to heat. Less air to warm up, fewer places for drafts to sneak in, and more walls packed into the space. Nobles often had more than one room in their suite. A great hall for daytime activities and a small bedchamber tucked behind it for sleeping. Picture a noble walking through a large stone room where you can see your breath, and then slipping into a smaller chamber where the heat from a single fire actually makes a difference. In many cases, people purposely slept in the tiniest room available. A room barely big enough for a bed was perfect because it held warmth like a little oven. Stone walls. Cold, but surprisingly clever. Let's talk about those thick stone walls. Yes, stone is cold. Very cold. It can feel like hugging an ice cube with a moat. But thick stone walls also had a hidden advantage. They held steady temperatures. Stone takes a long time to heat up, but it also takes a long time to cool down. So once a room was warmed by fire, body heat, or sunshine, it stayed a little warmer than you'd expect. Castles weren't cozy like modern homes, but their walls protected people from the worst of the wind and weather. No matter how cold it got outside, you were shielded from rain, snow, and freezing gusts. The walls might feel icy to touch, but they kept the inside from becoming an outdoor refrigerator. Fireplaces, hearths, and clever placement. A medieval bedroom often had a small fireplace. Not a giant roaring one you could dance in front of, just a simple hearth meant to warm a room the size of a large closet. But the placement mattered. People usually arranged beds near the fireplace, but not too close. Heat was precious, but so was not catching your blanket on fire. A good spot was close enough to feel warmth and far enough to avoid spontaneous flame-related wake-up calls. The fireplace also connected to the chimney, which meant fewer drafts leaking into the room. Today we think of chimneys as heat stealers, but medieval chimneys acted like controlled airflow systems. They kept smoke out, warmth in, and allowed fires to burn longer and safer. Doors designed as draft shields. Medieval doors were often small, thick, heavy, placed inside little recessed frames. Why? To block wind. That a well-fitted door could stop cold air from rushing into a bedroom. And people made this even better with draft blockers, rolls of cloth or fur placed along the bottom of the door. Yes, medieval people basically invented the door snake. They also used woven mats or animal skins around doorways to stop heat from escaping. Medieval interior design might not have involved throw pillows, but they were experts at plugging holes. Roommates. The warmest decoration in the Middle Ages. Your best room-warming decoration wasn't a candle or arug.it was another person. Or 2. Or 5. A warm room was often a crowded room. Servants sleeping near their lords added body heat to the air. Children in the same room kept temperatures up. Even dogs became part of the heating plan. Medieval people didn't say, "It's cold tonight, bring extra blankets." They said, "It's cold tonight, everyone into the bedchamber." A room with 6 people sleeping inside stayed much warmer than a room with one lonely noble shivering under 3 blankets. It was communal survival, medieval edition. Furniture placement. Strategic and smart. Medieval people didn't just toss furniture around randomly. They understood airflow, even if they didn't use that word. Beds were placed away from windows, far from open hallways, near warmer interior walls and corners, protected by tapestries. Those thick wall hangings weren't just decoration. They added a layer of insulation. A tapestry on the wall worked like a giant medieval sweatshirt for the room, helping trap warmth inside. Even chests, benches, and wardrobes were arranged to help block drafts. Everything in the room had a job: keep you warm, or at least help a little. In the end, room arrangement was survival. Every detail, from the height of the chamber to the curtain around the bed, came from hundreds of years of living with cold stone walls and long winters. Medieval people didn't have thermostats. They didn't have heated floors. They didn't even have fluffy blankets from home decor stores. They had stone, wood, cloth, fire, and the cleverness to arrange them all in a way that kept their families alive through dark, icy nights. And maybe, if they were lucky, a loyal dog curled up at their feet, snoring softly. Picture this. You're trying to sleep in a castle. You're bundled in wool. You've got a thick blanket. Maybe even a dog sleeping on your feet for bonus warmth. You've done everything right, but then a wind sneaks in and hits you right in the face like a ghost with chilly fingers. Why? Because medieval windows were, let's be honest, not great. Tonight, we're gently drifting into the world of medieval windows. How they worked, how they failed, and how people tried very, very hard to stop icy breezes from turning their bedrooms into early morning torture chambers. Pull your blanket up to your chin. Imagine the moonlight slipping through a tiny window. And let's explore how people in castles kept the outside where it belonged. Outside. Windows were small. For a very good reason. If you've ever visited a medieval castle, you probably noticed something. The windows are tiny. Like, is this for light or for decoration? Tiny. They had good reasons for keeping them small. Big windows equals weak castle walls. Big windows equals bad news during battles. Big windows equals freezing air everywhere. Stone walls were thick and heavy. Cutting giant holes in them wasn't exactly a smart idea. So windows stayed narrow, tall, and small enough to defend, warm enough to survive. Small windows meant less air sneaking in, less cold, less wind, less freezing sadness. Basically, medieval windows were the adjustable difficulty setting for let's not die of cold. Most windows had no glass at all. Here's the part that might surprise you. For most of the medieval period, windows didn't even have glass. Yup, that stuff was expensive, hard to make, hard to transport, and very fragile. Instead, people used things like wooden shutters, cloth soaked in oil-thin parchment, animal horn slices, leather panels. Imagine trying to keep out winter with a window made of stretched animal skin. Functional? Yes. Pretty? Absolutely not. But parchment and oiled cloth let in a bit of light while blocking some wind, kind of like the world's oldest frosted glass effect. Not perfect, but better than a window that acted like a doorway for cold air. Still, You wanted to avoid leaning on it, touching it too hard, or breathing too aggressively near it. Shutters. The medieval MVP. The real heroes of medieval windows were shutters. Thick wooden slabs attached to hinges. You opened them during the day to let in light, and slammed them shut at night to stop the castle from becoming a freezer. That a well-crafted shutter could actually do a decent job. People lined them with fur-heavy cloth, straw mats, tapestries, basically anything that gave the shutter a little extra insulation boost. Once the sun set, someone, usually a servant, went from room to room, closing shutters and pushing thick materials against them. Think of it like medieval weatherproofing. The winter version of did you close the windows before bed? If you forgot, well, good luck. Wind loved finding its way inside. Even with shutters and cloth covers, windows could still be drafty. Stone doesn't always fit neatly around wood, and wood doesn't always stay perfectly sealed, so cold air found every crack and gap, wandering into rooms like an uninvited guest. People described sleeping chambers with breezes strong enough to blow out candles or make tapestries flutter. Imagine trying to sleep and suddenly feeling a cold gust brush across your face that you'd pull your blanket tighter. Maybe grumble to yourself. Maybe nudge the person next to you and whisper, "Did you leave the window open again?" Only to find the shutters tightly closed and the problem unsolvable. If that's medieval window life. No, I did not leave it open. It's just rude wind. Tapestries, not just decoration. Tapestries hanging on the walls didn't just look fancy. They had an actual job, insulation. But tapestries were also used around windows specifically to block cold. Many rooms had curtains or cloth coverings that hung from rods above the windows. These acted as a shield between the sleeping person and the outdoor chill. Imagine thick, woven fabric swaying gently as the wind pressed against it. It didn't stop the cold completely, but it softened the blow. Some wealthy homes even had double curtains, one across the window, one over it inside the room. A medieval double-pane window made of, well, fabric, glass arrives. But slowly and expensively glass windows eventually appeared, especially in wealthier castles and churches. But early medieval glass was cloudy, uneven, fragile, mostly decorative. You weren't staring out of a crystal-clear pane. You were squinting through something that looked like a foggy ice cube. Still, it kept wind out better than parchment or leather. And as glass-making improved, so did comfort. Nobles sometimes installed small panes set in lead frames, the ancestors of modern windows. But even then, glass wasn't used for every window. Usually only the important rooms got it, like the Lord's Chamber. The chapel guest rooms for high-ranking visitors' servants? They got shutters and prayer, deep window seats, cozy or cold. Some castle windows had deep stone frames, the perfect size for a window seat. You might imagine people sitting there, reading by sunlight. Reality? Those window seats were chilly. Very chilly. Like sitting next to a giant stone refrigerator. But they were useful. A person could open the shutters without freezing the whole room. You could sit there during the day wrapped in a cloak. You could tuck blankets in the gap at night to stop drafts. Window seats were a cute idea, but not a nighttime choice unless you wanted very cold dreams. Winterizing the window area. Medieval style. When the harshest months arrived, people took extra steps to protect their precious bedrooms. They stuffed wool in window cracks. They hung thick furs over openings. They draped cloth across the bed's canopy edge facing the window. They sometimes moved the bed to the opposite wall entirely. Why? Because if a window was particularly leaky, it became the deadly side of the room. The area where toes froze first and blankets didn't stand a chance. If you slept too close to a bad window, you'd wake up with a headache, cold nose, and the feeling that winter had slapped you sometime around midnight. Windows and sound. A medieval bonus problem. Cold wasn't the only thing slipping through those windows. Sound traveled easily, too. You might be trying to drift off while dogs barked in the courtyard, guards chatted, horses clopped by, wind howled, someone dropped something heavy 4 floors below. A rooster decided 3 a.m. was morning. Many medieval windows didn't mute anything. They were basically sound funnels. Imagine lying in bed, trying to relax, but every echo from outside gently or aggressively, reminding you that privacy did not exist. In the end, windows were helpful and painful. Medieval windows let in light, which was precious. They allowed fresh air in when needed. They connected people to the outside world, but they also made winter nights difficult. People did everything they could to seal them up, warm them up, and survived the long months when castles got as cold as giant stone ice chests. And despite their challenges, medieval people learned to live with their imperfect windows, bundling themselves in warmth and curling close to fires, beds, and each other. Because at the end of the day, or the night, medieval survival wasn't about perfect insulation. It was about working with what you had, closing the shutters tight, pulling the curtains close, and whispering, "Please, for once, no drafts tonight." Welcome back to our quiet little stroll through medieval nighttime. By this point in our journey, we've figured out how folks kept warm with layers, curtains, furs, hot stones, shared beds, and the power of pure stubbornness. But now we've arrived at something equally important in the life of a sleepy medieval castle resident: the sounds. Because yes, medieval castles look peaceful in movies. Moonlight, soft wind, maybe an owl hooting poetically, but in real life? Let's just say silence was not part of the package. If you've ever tried to sleep in a house where the heating system knocks or a fridge hums in the middle of the night, congratulations, you already relate to castle life. Only multiply that by 100. And then add animals. Tonight we're sinking into the soundscape of a medieval castle. And don't worry, we're keeping it calm and relaxing. Think of this as a bedtime tour of all the noises that wandered the halls while people tried to drift off without freezing or going mildly insane. Let's settle in. Take a slow breath. Imagine you're lying on a straw-filled mattress, wrapped up like a burrito in wool blankets, the stone walls holding in whatever heat they can. And now, listen. First sound on our list, the wind. Not the polite kind you hear outside a modern window. This medieval castle wind is dramatic. It whistles through arrow slits, moans down narrow passages, and occasionally gives a ghost-level performance just for fun. If you always thought castles were haunted, well, honestly, sometimes the wind just made them sound haunted. You'd be lying there, half asleep, when suddenly the wind would push through a crack in the wall and let out a long, oh, not exactly Nightmare Central, but definitely a pull-the-blanket-closer moment. The good news is that people got used to it. Eventually, the wind's strange melody almost became background music, like medieval white noise. Very white, very cold. Next up, we have the crackle and pop of fires. Earlier we talked about fireplaces not being very efficient in heating whole rooms, and that's true, but they still made noise. The fire had its own personality, sometimes soothing, sometimes chaotic. A log might suddenly snap and send sparks flying like it was trying to start a tiny rebellion. If you were sleeping near the hearth, that was your lullaby. Warm, cozy, maybe a little unpredictable, but definitely comforting. Now let's talk about animals, because in a medieval castle, animals were basically part of the night shift. Horses in the stables might whinny or shuffle around. Dogs barked at things they thought were suspicious. Chickens clucked quietly. Even the geese got involved. Geese were basically medieval security alarms, always ready to honk at absolutely nothing. Inside the castle, mice and sometimes rats made their own appearances. They scurried in the walls, under the floorboards, anywhere they could find crumbs or warmth. The people weren't thrilled, but honestly, if you lived in a stone fridge, you had bigger problems than a couple of rodents tiptoeing around at 2 a.m. And then we have the humans. Oh yes. Castle walls weren't great at soundproofing. Thick stone carries sound beautifully. So if someone snored on the other side of the room, or even across the hall, you heard it. If someone got up to use the chamber pot, you heard that too. And if someone clanked around with armor because they were on guard duty, that was basically a built-in alarm clock. Speaking of guards, their footsteps echoed a lot. Heavy boots on stone floors don't exactly whisper. Each step created this deep, rhythmic clunk, 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 like they were pacing right through your dreams. But for castle residents, that sound meant protection. It meant someone was awake, keeping watch, making sure nothing dangerous wandered in from the dark. That noise was oddly comforting, like the medieval version of a security system pinging to tell you everything's fine. Now, depending on the castle and the time period, you might also hear bells. Bells marked prayer times, curfews, and sometimes the hours of the night. Imagine you're drifting into sleep, and suddenly a bell rings out because it's time for monks to pray. Not exactly relaxing, but it was part of the rhythm of medieval life. That we should also mention doors. Big castle doors didn't open quietly. They groaned. They rumbled. They announced their every movement like dramatic theater performers. Even small wooden doors creaked in ways that could make you wonder if someone, or something, was coming in. Most of the time, it was just a servant moving around or someone checking on the fire. But still, medieval hinges loved attention, and let's not forget the outside world. The forest surrounding many castles wasn't shy. Wolves howled, owls hooted, foxes barked. Yes, foxes bark. It's terrifying if you don't expect it, and occasionally a wild boar grunted its way through the underbrush like it paid rent. But here's the cozy twist. Despite all these sounds, medieval people slept. They learned to filter out the noises, to understand which sounds meant safety and which meant danger. Their brains adjusted. What would keep many of us wide awake until sunrise actually lulled them into a familiar, almost comforting nighttime routine. And because everyone was dealing with the same environment, it all felt normal. If your neighbor snored loudly, well, he probably heard you tossing and turning when your blanket slipped off in the middle of the night. If the guard's boots echoed, that was just the castle breathing. If the wind moaned through the walls, it wasn't spooky. It was Tuesday. There's something strangely peaceful about imagining this soundscape. A castle wasn't silent, but it was alive. And the people living inside it found their rest not by removing noise, but by embracing it as you settle your imaginary medieval blankets around your shoulders. Picture yourself drifting off to a mix of crackling fire, distant footsteps, snoring, animals shifting in their sleep, and the soft hum of a world without electric lights or modern machines. A world where night felt deeper, longer, and full of character. And maybe, just maybe, all those sounds made the cold a little easier to forget. That's the end of Chapter 13. Ready for Chapter 14 whenever you are. Welcome back to our soft, lantern-lit journey into the medieval night. So far, we've wrapped ourselves in wool blankets, tucked behind bed curtains, listened to crackling fires, and let the soundscape of castle life carry us off to sleep. But before medieval folks could settle in for the night, many of them had to follow one more layer of routine. Rituals and little superstitions they believed kept them warm, safe, and on the good side of fate. Tonight, we're stepping into those rituals. Not the wild, dramatic ones you see in movies. These are small, everyday habits that helped ease the mind before bed. Tiny comforts that made sleeping in a giant, freezing stone building feel just a little more manageable. Take a breath. Get comfortable. Imagine you're holding a candle, its warm glow flickering across the stone walls. Let's wander into the cozy, sometimes quirky world of medieval bedtime traditions. Let's start with something simple, the bedtime blessing. Before sleeping, many castle residents whispered a small prayer or blessing. They believed it protected them from harm, physical and not so physical. Medieval people took nighttime very seriously. Darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was a whole world where anything spooky, unlucky, or mischievous could wander around. A quick prayer was like putting a spiritual blanket over yourself, and honestly, after a long day in a cold castle, a little calming bedtime mantra probably felt pretty nice. Next came the fire check. The hearth was the heart of the room, even though it wasn't great at heating anything more than a few feet away. Still, before bed, someone, usually a servant or the lady of the house, would rake the embers, bank the fire, and make sure it wasn't going to flare up unexpectedly in the middle of the night. The goal was to keep a low, glowing warmth that wouldn't fill the room with smoke. Imagine kneeling beside a glowing bed of coals, gently nudging them into a safe, cozy pile. It's almost meditative, slightly romantic, slightly dangerous. Perfect medieval combo. Then we have the nightly locking ritual. Castles had doors, so many doors. Big wooden ones, tiny iron ones, heavy reinforced ones that needed 2 people and a good push. Before bedtime, these doors had to be checked, locked, barred, or reinforced with a big chunk of wood that looked like it belonged in a giant's toolbox. Picture the sound, a deep thunk as a bar drops into place. Another thunk. Then maybe a hang on, it didn't catch. Lift it again. Medieval people might not have had alarm systems, but they definitely had bedtime upper body workouts. And if you think locking up was only for security, think again. Some folks believed that spirits or bad luck could slip in through doors left open at night. So locking things wasn't just physical, it was psychological safety too. Because nothing says good night like making sure you've sealed off both burglars and imaginary gremlins. Now let's talk about bedside objects. the medieval version of keeping a glass of water and your phone nearby. Some people placed blessed charms or symbols close to the bed. Something small, like a wooden cross or a sprig of herbs tucked under the pillow. Lavender wasn't the star back then, but rosemary, sage, and thyme were popular choices. And yes, it probably made the room smell like someone was preparing a roast chicken, but hey, it worked for their peace of mind. And honestly, if you've ever slept with a stuffed animal, who are we to judge medieval herb pillows? Next on our list, what people believed about dreams. Dreams were a whole topic by themselves. Many medieval folks thought dreams held messages, warnings, advice, or even glimpses of the future. So before bed, people sometimes tried to prepare their minds to get good dreams. That meant avoiding angry thoughts, eating light meals, and not drinking too much ale right before sleeping. Though the last one was honored more in theory than practice, some even believed certain foods would give them nightmares, like heavy meats or cheese. Yes, medieval people blamed cheese for night terrors long before it became a meme. Imagine a knight sitting sadly at dinner, staring at a slice of cheese. If I eat this, will I dream of dragons again? But these bedtime habits weren't just superstitions. They were comforting routines. Little acts that helped you feel warmer, calmer, and more in control. Now, let's move into the shared bedtime moments. In many castle rooms, multiple people slept together, not always in the same bed, but in the same space. So before everyone drifted off, there were quiet conversations, whispered jokes, or soft stories. Maybe someone ended the night by humming a tune. Maybe someone told a tiny prayer aloud. It wasn't always quiet. Someone always had to cough loudly or adjust their blankets like they were wrestling a bear. But the goal was a gentle transition into sleep. Imagine the murmur of voices fading slowly as one by one. The room went still, but not entirely still, because we need to talk about the chamber pot routine. Ah yes, the glamorous part. Before going to sleep, people made sure the chamber pot was in a convenient spot. Far enough away to avoid smelling it, close enough to reach when absolutely necessary. Nothing ruins your medieval REM cycle like fumbling around in the dark looking for the wrong corner. And while we're at it, candle rituals were important too. People gently snuffed out their candles, sometimes with a candle snuffer, sometimes with damp fingers, sometimes with a very dramatic puff of air. Extinguishing the last candle meant the room slipped into complete darkness. The kind of dark we rarely experience today. A soft, thick darkness that wrapped around you like another blanket. Finally, we reach one of the sweetest rituals, the bedtime warmth routine. Earlier chapters talked about warming stones or bricks, but here they become part of the ritual. Heated by the fire, wrapped carefully, placed between layers of bedding. People carried them to bed like sleepy pets. You'd slip under your blankets, press your toes against the warm spot, and suddenly life didn't feel so cold that it wasn't just about warmth. It was a nightly reminder that someone cared enough to prepare this small comfort. In a world full of chill and shadows, that tiny glow mattered. And that's the heart of medieval bedtime rituals. Small acts of care, small acts of protection, small acts of hope. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated. Just humans trying to create a little pocket of peace before drifting into a long, cold night. Imagine yourself settling down now, listening to the last crackles of the fire, feeling the warmth of the stone at your feet, breathing in the herbal scent of your pillow charm, knowing the doors are locked, the room is safe, and the darkness is calm. With all that, finally, sleep comes that we've spent the night tucked inside the chilly embrace of a medieval castle, wrapped in wool, warmed by stones, serenaded by creaking doors, snoring roommates, and the occasional owl auditioning for a solo. Now it's time to peek at the final chapter of our sleepy journey, the moment when morning finally creeps in. You might think the hardest part of medieval castle life was falling asleep in the cold. But honestly, waking up wasn't much easier. Let's drift, gently and calmly, into the world of medieval mornings, a world where every breath looked like a tiny cloud, and getting out of bed required heroic levels of motivation. Take a slow breath. Imagine you're still wrapped up like a human croissant under layers of blankets. The fire has died down to nothing but gray ashes. The night is quiet. And then, somewhere outside, a rooster decides you've rested enough. Let's begin. Morning didn't exactly tiptoe into a medieval castle. There were no alarm clocks, but trust me, There was no shortage of things eager to wake you up. Roosters crowed. Servants moved through the hallways. Guards changed shifts and stomped around like they were auditioning for a percussion band. And the cold, oh, the cold, had this charming habit of slapping you awake the moment your nose peeked out from under the blankets. If you've ever camped on a cold morning and thought, "Nope, I'm not getting out of this sleeping bag," congratulations, you've just reenacted medieval castle life. As the sun started to rise, soft pale light would slip through the narrow windows. Not wide enough to warm the room, of course, but enough to let you know the day had officially started. Those arrow-slit windows were basically nature's version of, "Good morning. Time to suffer. Be productive." But before anyone actually got out of bed, there came the great medieval tradition of pretend you're awake but don't move yet. Every castle resident knew the drill. You lay there, perfectly still, mentally preparing for the instant icy shock waiting outside your blanket cocoon. Eventually, though, reality won. And then came step one of every medieval morning. Locate your shoes before your feet touch the floor, or deeply regret your choices. Castle floors were freezing. Not cold. Not chilly. Freezing, like, "I'm pretty sure this floor is conspiring against me," levels of cold. If you were lucky, you kept your boots or slippers right beside the bed. If you weren't lucky, well, that first step woke you up faster than coffee ever could. Once your feet survived, it was time to relight the fire. Or, more accurately, time for the poor, half-asleep servant to relight the fire. This was almost a daily miracle, kneeling beside an icy hearth, blowing gently on the last surviving embers, adding twigs, coaxing life back into that stubborn flame. The room would slowly brighten, slowly warm, very slowly. But watching those tiny flames grow was like watching hope itself stretch and yawn. As the fire crackled to life, the room smelled like warm wood, a little smoke, and maybe faint hints of last night's herbs. A simple scent, but comforting, like the medieval version of a morning candle. Next came shaking out the bedding. Medieval mattresses were basically giant, lumpy pillows stuffed with straw, feathers, or wool. Over time, the stuffing shifted, so people had to fluff, beat, and rearrange everything each morning. A good shake meant the mattress would be slightly less lumpy the next night. Slightly. And before you imagine this happening peacefully, picture two sleepy people lifting a heavy straw mattress and trying not to drop it on their feet. Truly, medieval mornings were a workout. After that came dressing, and believe me, getting dressed in a cold castle was an extreme sport. Clothes were wool, thick, and not exactly easy to slip on. Layer after layer, fastening ties, wrapping belts, pulling on socks. If you've ever gotten dressed while still half asleep and thought it took too long, remember medieval folks needed a full strategy meeting just to put on pants. Now, before anyone headed off to their daily tasks, there was the all-important moment of checking the weather. Not by looking at the sky, by looking at the walls. If the stone walls had a little sparkle of frost on them, well, that was your medieval weather forecast. Cold. Very cold. Possibly, should we just go back to bed? Cold. Sometimes even the water in the wash basin froze overnight. Imagine dipping your hands into that at dawn. Instant wake-up. Instant regret. Now, as people finally shuffled into the hallways, the castle slowly came alive. You'd hear quiet footsteps, gentle voices, maybe the thud of wood being carried to different rooms. Kitchens began their morning fires. Servants moved about, knights stretched stiff bones, and children, who apparently didn't feel cold as much as adults, ran around like they were training for a medieval Olympic event. And then, of course, there was breakfast. Not a feast, but something warm if you were lucky, porridge, bread, maybe some cheese. Something simple that reminded your body, hey, things aren't so bad. And honestly, eating something warm after a cold night probably felt like heaven. And here's the funny part. Despite all the morning struggles, most people adapted. They accepted the routine. The cold didn't surprise them. The stiff clothes, the icy floors, the early chores, the slow building fires, it was all part of daily life. People laughed through it, complained out loud, complained quietly, complained politely, but they kept going. And that's the beauty of the medieval morning. It wasn't perfect, but it was familiar. The cold didn't feel impossible once the fire crackled again. The light creeping through the windows meant another day of work, stories, meals, and moments shared with others in the same chilled stone world. There was comfort in the routine, warmth in the shared struggle, a strange coziness in a life that balanced hardship with simple joys. Oh, imagine yourself there now, sitting beside a slowly brightening window, watching your breath puff in the air, feeling the fire finally warming your fingers, listening to the soft rhythm of people starting their day. The cold still lingers, but you've survived another medieval night. And soon, the castle will buzz with life again. For now, though, just enjoy this peaceful dawn, the final chapter of our journey into how people slept, dreamed, shivered, and woke inside those great stone walls.